Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to go over a couple of functions that I found useful, mostly for reading in data or manipulating data that you've gotten from a user. This video is entirely optional. I recommend if you're struggling with this class or you're not up on everything already, probably don't even watch it. Over here on the left, I've got the functions and operators that I'll go over briefly in this video. And then here on the right, I've got those same functions with a brief description of them, as well as some of the other functions like std up here that we covered in the casting variables video. So I'll walk through this just really briefly, and then we'll walk through some code that explains how some of these work. So one of the ones, static cast. This is another way of changing a variable of one type into another type. And the correct syntax for this is that inside the characters here, you'll have the variable type that you want to change this to. And then inside the parentheses, you'll have the original variable type. So here I've changed some double that I've called my double into an integer. And I've decided to set that equal to my int here, which you don't actually have to do. You can just use this function by itself if you have some use for it. You don't necessarily have to set a variable equal to it, although that will often be useful. And then below that, I covered some of the stuff using .substring here and treating a string as an array of characters. I covered that stuff in the video on casting variables. New line commands, if you put \new, and you will have to put it in either single or double quotes, either one works, it will start a new line. This is most useful when you're doing cout statements with some of the homework assignments later on in the class. Maybe you'll need to print stuff out on multiple lines, but you just want to put it all in one cout statement. I found this useful a few times just to help my code look clean. This scope resolution operator I thought was pretty cool. We'll use it in this transform function later on, as we will these .begin and .end. So that's why I've included those. Again, you don't need to know these for this class. I just thought they were cool and I found them helpful. The first thing I wanted to show you, the reason that I didn't go over static cast in the video on casting variables, is the most common type of casting I think you'll do in this class is changing a string to an integer. And as I put here, this doesn't work. The static cast does not work if you're just passing in a string and trying to convert it to an integer. However, it can be useful, as I noted over here, that this will work with pointers. So you can change a pointer of one type into a pointer to a different type. And I just wanted to make you aware of some of this stuff, because if you're like me, you don't know what you don't know. And if you know these functions exist or ones like them, it makes it a lot easier to Google and kind of learn for yourself. So that's why I've included this stuff. And then down here, just an example of the new line operator. And you can see I actually already ran this earlier. So here we've declared an integer 12, and we're printing it out, my int. And then we're using this new line operator. So \n needs to be inside some sort of quotes, and then some other stuff. And you can see it prints out 12, skips down to the next line. And I just found that helpful for some of the videos, or I'm sorry, some of the homework assignments in this class, to print out stuff in the correct format and still keep my code from looking kind of crazy or having like 4 or 5 cout statements. I could put a lot of it on one line once I knew it was printing out correctly, and it just, for me, it helped make the code look clearer and help me with debugging. So the next thing I'm going to cover here, I'll just go ahead and run this so we can get this cleaned up. So we see this prints out Christy Pierce number 3. One of the things that I found useful is converting characters to lowercase to make sure that when I'm getting a user input, that they're giving me the correct kind of input. So really just input verification. And how you can do this is using this transform function. And let me just uncomment that out and expand this a little bit. So again, you absolutely do not need to know this for this class, but this is in the algorithm library, this transform function. And let's start off with .begin and .end here. So .begin and .end both return iterators, and it's a pointer to an iterator, and it tells it the location. So the first argument for transform is that it wants to know where it's going to do something on an array, and it needs to know where to start. And so by putting in the string, which again we can treat as an array, and .begin, we're returning the location to the first item in the array using .begin. So it's going to start in the first item of this character array, this string here. And then .end just does the same thing, except for it's going to return the end. So what we're doing is we're going to iterate this transform function and from the beginning to the end of this function. We could also choose a different location, and that would also work if we didn't want to iterate through the entire thing. And I might demonstrate that towards the end of the video once we're done going over this function the first time. And then the third thing here is that this transform it's going to output something. And so we've told it where to start and where to end, and then it wants to know where should I start outputting once I've applied this fourth argument here is the function that you want to apply to each one of these items in the array. And so this third thing is where it wants you to output that. So it's going to apply this fourth item, this fourth argument, to each item in the array, and it wants to know where to output it to, where to start. And of course, since it's going to iterate from the beginning to the end, that's how many times it's going to output it. But it just wants to know where to start, and then it'll keep iterating through. So we're going to change this string. We're going to apply some operator to this entire string, and we're actually going to have it overwrite what's already in this operator, or already in this string, I'm sorry. So this : is just what you need to put here because we're using toLower, which is a function, and normally it would be toLower, and then you would have brackets here, and that would be the function. You wouldn't need the : but for a transform to accept this argument, you'll need that, and I'm not going to go into that right now why you need that. You can look it up for yourself if you're interested. But what we're doing here is this toLower is making everything lowercase, and so with this syntax, what we should see is an error because I deleted a parentheses. Excuse me. Let's try that. There we go. So we see that Christy Pierce, the first time, is we have capitalized, and then the second time we see that it put everything into lowercase. And so if we're expecting some kind of user input and we're afraid they're going to put a capital and we haven't prepared for that, we're expecting lowercase, that might be one of the ways that this function is useful. And again, note that we're overriding this, so this variable, we're using the same variable. You could put this into another variable, but you really have to be careful when you do that because there's a lot of weird things it can do. If you declared a new variable, a new string, for example, and the string wasn't long enough, it won't throw an error, but it'll only print out the correct number or the number of characters in the original string. So I'll give you an example here. So we'll call this, we'll just call it Pierce_num, and we'll just keep it lowercase here, and we'll declare just an empty string, and then let's also tell it to output now to that same string that we just declared, and then let's print out that string and see what it prints out. So just go through here, and we're going to see it doesn't print out anything, which it doesn't throw an error, which is almost worse than if it threw an error. And now if we put this equal to an empty string, we're going to find that it does the exact same thing. Now, actually that one, it doesn't, it threw an error because I didn't have our semicolon here at the end. Now if I make a bunch of characters here, it'll work and it'll print this out. But it will not change the length of this original string. So here it only prints out the number of characters. So anyways, that's one of the confusing things that can be about transforms. So you have to be careful when you're using this, that you're using it correctly. But it takes, just to go over this one more time, it takes 4 arguments. The first one is the beginning location you want it to iterate through. Second one is the end location. And then the third argument is where you'd like it to output the beginning location. And it'll output and iterate through each time, however many iterations you need to go from beginning to end here that you've passed in. And then here is the operator you want it to apply. And this operator has to be what's called unary. So it needs to have a single argument and a input and a single output. So toLower does, because you give it one character and it converts it to a lowercase if it's able to, and then it outputs that. So one input and one output. This one always has to be a unary operator. It can't be 2 inputs and 1 output, or 1 input and 2 outputs. So anyways, I hope this helps. I hope it wasn't more confusing than anything. If it was, please let me know at the bottom, and I'll either fix it or get rid of it altogether.